Hello, this is Dr. Dan Wedding, and this is DrWedding VB07 If Statements and If Blocks. An if statement can activate or deactivate code depending on the circumstances. This is sometimes called branching. When you write a program, you must think of every possible way the program can run. For example, if a program is controlling an alarm system, then the program must have code to arm the system, disarm the system, set off the alarm, reset the system after an alarm has been tripped, and so on. Code must be written for each of these possible events. However, you don't want all of these events to happen at the same time. An if statement can control what code is executed and at what time. Because an if can select what code is activated, it has many uses. Some of the uses include counting items, filtering incoming data, removing unwanted data, sorting items, and many other tasks. An if statement will check a comparison and determine if it is true or false. If the comparison is true, the if statement will run the code, and if the comparison is false, it will skip over the code. An if statement makes a comparison between two values. A list of comparisons is shown below. Please pause the video and review this list. An if statement knows where to start because of the if, but it also needs to know where to stop. That is the job of the end if. In the code below, the text on the text box will change depending on the value of int bob. This example has 3 if statements in a row. Note, there can be as many lines between the if and end if as needed. To keep this example short and simple, there is only one line of code in each of the 3 if statements. The 3 if statements are shown in the boxes below. An if block is made up of one or more if statements. An if block starts with an if statement and ends with an end if. Looking at the same example, you can see there are 3 if blocks. Each if block is inside of a purple box. Each of these if blocks has only one if statement. To join an if statement to a previous if statement, use else if instead of if. The example below has combined the 3 if blocks into a single if block. As always, the if block starts with if and ends with end if. In this example, there is one if block with 3 if statements. Note, in an if block, only the first true statement is executed. All the rest are ignored, even if they are true. Else is an optional statement that can be used at the end of an if block. If you decide to use an else, there can be only one. An else statement does not have a comparison and is always true. The example shows an else in place of the last else if. If statements and else if statements compare two values. If the statement is true, it will execute its code. If the statement is false, the statement is skipped and the next statement is evaluated. Note, else statements do not have a comparison, and they are always true. Between the two values, there is a symbol used to determine if the statement is true or false. A list of symbols you can use to compare two values is shown below. In the example below, the if statement is comparing two values, int bob and the number 7. It is comparing the values using the not equal symbol. If int bob is not equal to 7, the statement is true, and it will be executed. The rest of the if block will be ignored. If it helps you visualize what is going on, you may add a set of parentheses around the comparison. These are optional. Some people use them, others do not. You can join comparisons together using and or. These comparisons work like they do in English. For a comparison joined by and, all of the comparisons need to be true. Consider the following statement. I will give you $100 if you wash the dishes and you iron my shirt. Because the two statements are joined by and, both statements need to be true in order to get the money. For a comparison joined by or, only one statement needs to be true. Consider the following statement. I will give you $100 if you wash the dishes or you iron my shirt. Because the two statements are joined by or, only one statement needs to be true in order to get the money. Note, there is no bonus for both statements being true. Not also works like it does in English. It will invert the meaning. For a comparison starting with not, the meaning is inverted. Consider the following statement. I will give you $100 if you do not break a dish while you're moving them to the new house. Because the statement break a dish starts with not, the meaning is inverted. The statement means you want unbroken dishes. When you join comparisons together, they must be complete comparisons. If I want to check if integer Bob is a value from 1 to 5, then I would type in the if statement below. Adding the optional parentheses may make it easier for you to understand. You can see that both comparisons have two parts. The first part compares int Bob to 1, and the second part compares int Bob to 5. A second set of optional parentheses for the and also shows the and is comparing two comparisons. There are many common errors that new programmers make when using and or. The most common error is not making two complete comparisons. Using the previous example, many new programmers try to combine the two comparisons into one to avoid using the and. Some incorrect examples are shown below. Adding the optional parentheses would highlight the errors because it would become impossible to group comparisons of two items. This is demonstrated below. Now that we have reviewed the if statement and the if block, let's use it in an example. I have already opened up a new Visual Basic project named VB07. I have also created a form. On the form is an input text box for entering a number named txtnumin, a button to evaluate the information that's entered named btn evaluate number, a text box to output the information named txt output, and a text box to display error messages named txt error msg. By double-clicking the button, we can go to the code section. In the code section, I've already written the comments. First, I'm going to declare a variable that will be used to read in the value from the text box. Next, I'm going to generate a try-catch. Now I'm ready to read in the value from the text box and store it in int value. Now we can start our if block. Our if block will start with an if, and the if will compare two values. It will compare int value to the number 0. If int value is greater than 0, the statement will be true, and the code will be executed. The code will print positive to the text box and change the background color of the text box to green. An else if statement is then added to the if block. it will compare int value to the number 0. If the comparison is true, then the else if is executed, and it will print 0 to the text box and change the background color of the text box to blue. Finally, a second else if will be added to this if block. The second else if will compare int value to the number 0, and if it's less than 0, the statement will be true, and it will print negative to the text box and change the background color to red. This is a single if block with 3 if statements in it. Let's test this code. Let's start with a negative value first. -9. The program will bring the value in from the text box and store it in int val. Once in int val, it will be evaluated by the if block. The if is first. -9 is greater than 0 is evaluated. This is a false statement, so the if is ignored and the else if is evaluated. -9 is equal to 0 is also a false statement, so the first else if is ignored and the second else if is evaluated. -9 is less than 0 is a true statement. Therefore, this else if is executed. Negative is written to the text box and the background color is changed to red. Now let's enter a positive value. Just as before, the if is evaluated first. 5 is greater than 0 is a true statement. Therefore, the if statement is executed. The text in the text box is changed to positive and the background color is changed to green. Because this is the first true statement, it is executed. All the remaining statements are ignored. When the value is exactly 0, 0 is greater than 0 is a false statement, so the if is ignored. The else if is then evaluated. 0 is equal to 0 is a true statement, so the text is changed to 0 and the background color is changed to blue. The second else if is ignored. This if statement was very simple because it was mutually exclusive. That means a value could not be positive and negative at the same time. Any number that was entered could only be one of these 3 choices. Let's look at another example. I'm going to add some objects to the form. I have added 2 text boxes. The first text box is txt score. It will be a numerical value that will be used to assign a letter grade. The other text box is text letter grade. This is where the letter grade will be printed. I have also added a button, btn assign grade. This button will read in the score and assign the letter grade. As before, I'm going to minimize the previous subroutine to make room on the screen. Next, I'm going to write the code. Let's go over this code. The first line of code inside the try will read in the information from txt score and store it in a double variable named dbl score. Let's assume the number that was entered was 150. If you look at the if block, you'll see that 150 is true for the if and all of the else ifs. The else is automatically true. However, only the first true if statement in an if block is executed. Therefore, if 150 is greater than 100 is the only statement that will be executed, and error 1 will be printed to the output text box. The remaining if statements in this if block will be ignored. This if block only works because the values are being checked in numeric order. When the if is checked and it is true, we know the value is greater than 100. However, if the if is checked and it's false, we know the value is less than or equal to 100. When the first else if is checked, if it is true, we know the value is greater than 90 and less than or equal to 100. But if the first else if is false, we know the value must be less than 90. When the second else if is checked, if it is true, we know the value is between 80 and 90. However, if the second else if is false, we know that the value must be less than 80. And when the third else if is checked, if it is true, we know it's greater than or equal to 70 and less than 80. And if it is false, we know the value is less than 70. This logic continues through the entire if block. Let's verify that this if block works by running a few examples. Now let's move one of the else ifs and see what happens. I have moved the third else if into the first position. Now all values between 70 and 100 are assigned the letter grade C. This is an example of a logic error. All the code is written correctly, yet the program is not doing what you want. To avoid this kind of logic error, you can use and or in your if statements. I have added a second check to each one of the else ifs. Now, both statements must be true in order for the else if to be true. For example, if 95 was entered, the if would fail because 95 is not greater than 100. The first else if would check and 95 is greater than or equal to 70. However, in the second check, 95 is not less than 80. So the first else if fails. When the second else if is checked, 95 is greater than or equal to 90, and 95 is less than or equal to 100. Both statements are true, therefore the letter grade A is assigned. Because we used ands, the order of these else ifs no longer matters. The if and the else can also be combined. However, if we did and, it would be an impossible statement. There is no number that is greater than 100 and less than 0 at the same time. Therefore, we'll have to combine these two using an or. Let's save and run this code. In review, if blocks start with if and end with end if. An if block is made up of one or more if statements. In an if block, only the first true statement is executed, even if more than one statement is true. An if block must start with an if statement. If statements evaluate a comparison between two values. An if statement can be followed by 0 else if statements to an infinite number of else if statements. Else if statements also evaluate a comparison between two values. The last statement in an if block can be an else, but it is optional. When there is an else, there is only one, and it is at the end of the if block. No other statement can follow the last else. An else statement does not have a comparison and is always true. If statements and else if statements compare two values. If the comparison is evaluated and found to be true, the code under the statement is executed. If the comparison is evaluated and found to be false, the statement is skipped and the next statement is evaluated. A list of comparisons that can be made is shown below. More than one comparison can be made by an if or else if statement. The comparisons can be combined using the following commands. A command can be inverted using the not command at the start of the comparison. If you find these videos useful, please like and subscribe. It is the only way I can continue to make these videos.